Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Perth and Kinross Council Local Review Body meeting of Tuesday, the 8th of February 2022. I am the convener of the Local Review Body, Councillor Lewis Simpson, and I'm joined today by two serial volunteers, Councillor Ian James and Councillor Willie Wilson. I'm very grateful to these councillors for joining us. They are members of the Development Management Committee who take it in turns to volunteer for this committee. Thank you very much. We're also joined by our planning advisor, Mr. David Harrison. He is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement in any of the applications on the agenda today. We're also joined by Mr. Colin Elliott, who is the legal advisor to the local review body, and by Mr. Danny Williams from Committee Services. We now move on to declarations of interest. Can I ask you, colleagues, have you any declarations of interest today? I have none. Councillor James?
No, none for me, convener.
Councillor Wilson?
Convener, thank you. Yes, I'd like to declare an interest in item 4.2 on the agenda today. That's the one in Needless Road in Perth. I have had no involvement at all in the detail of the application before us, but I have had previously discussions with a number of people on the applications, the previous applications for the site, and I think just for absolute clarity and objectivity, I would withdraw from the discussion today on that one. I realise that creates a question of having a quorum, convener, but you may deal with that separately yourself.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. I think it's might be helpful to point out, members of the public, it's very important that we consider our interests in these matters, and that one's always better to err on the side of caution, as Councillor Wilson has done. We will need, therefore, to defer this item until a subsequent meeting, which we will have to have without Councillor Wilson. It is unfortunate that we were unable to get a volunteer to be the substitute for this committee. We often have substitutes, but not recently. So that's the reason we're going to have to defer. Ordinarily, we would swap Councillor Wilson for somebody else to consider that matter, but we cannot do that today. So I think we'll just move on. We don't have the minutes to hand, so we will consider the minutes of the last meeting at our next meeting, colleagues, if we're all happy with that. Okay. So we now move on to the items for review, and to the first item, item 4.1, which is the formation of two landscape bunds and associated access track at Bin Eco Park Wind Farm, Glenfarg. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. As you say, this is a detailed planning application for the formation of two landscape bunds and associated access track at Bin Eco Park Wind Farm, Glenfarg. The majority of the inert material for the application is expected to come from construction waste received at Bin Eco Park. The easterly and westerly bunds would contain some 86,000 and 50,000 cubic metres of material respectively. Ground levels would rise by some 18 metres. The existing access tracks would be extended to serve the sites of the bunds, which would be planted with trees on completion of the tipping operation. The closest houses lie some 140 and 240 metres towards the east. Now, I'll just take you through some photographs now, but you might like to have page 63 to hand to give you a location plan, and then other plans following that provide the site plans and drawings, including the cross sections of the bunds themselves. The sequence of the photographs will generally be turbine number 4, as you see in the first photograph here, and the house in relation to bund A, and then turbine number 3 and the house in relation to bund B, and then finally views up the slope from Mount Quarry. So as I say, just to take you through the photographs, in the first photograph here, this is us looking in a westerly direction from slightly down the slope towards the T4 turbine. and we step back, as it were, from this, and the arrows with the photographs will give you a general direction of one change from one photograph to the other. So if we move to the next photograph, we step back a little bit so that we can take in the other two turbines looking in a southwest direction. And then from that more elevated position, moving slightly towards the right, I beg your pardon, we turn round and we look at Bund A and looking down towards Mount Quarry House itself, looking in a northeasterly direction. And moving on from that photograph, we swing round to the right from that position in Bund A to look in a more easterly direction towards the conifer planting beyond the little gully there. Moving on to the next photograph, swinging round again to the right. This shows some of the landscape in that southeasterly direction from Bund A. And as you'll see, it's a fairly undulating landscape as referred to in the papers, I say between that position and the forestry beyond. And then moving on again in the next photograph to the right, we turn round and effectively look up the slope to the two turbines at the top. Swinging round again to the right in the next photograph, we're now looking from Bund A across to where Bund B is in general terms, and you can see the grounds falling away gradually towards the right and towards the east in this photograph. And of course there's reference in the papers to the overhead power line as a constraint on the possible positions of the bunds, and as you can see that in the photograph here. So if we move from there in the next photograph to Bund B, we look down the slope along the sight line, as it were, towards Mount Quarry House. It's looking in an northeasterly direction. And then if we turn round in the next photograph, we look in the opposite direction, back up the slope towards the turbine. Now, what I would mention in all of these photographs, inevitably trying to get an impression of the degree of impact of the proposed bounds is very difficult to achieve that, because obviously the level at which these photographs are taken are at existing ground level rather than being 18 meters more elevated. But I just want to, so we say, qualify all the photographs in that context. So from there, if we move to the next photograph, we say look into Mount Quarry House, and just to give you a broad context here to positions of both Bund A and Bund B. Say looking in that easterly direction from a slightly more elevated position. And as you can see, generally the ground is falling away from the turbines down towards Mount Quarry. And from there, if we swing to the right in the next photograph, we're looking across that more elevated area and taking in the first of the turbines, T3. And again, if we swing from the same position again to the right slightly, it takes in the other turbines and also part of the waste management area. If we move on to the next photograph, that gives you a general photograph to the more elevated area looking in that northwest direction. And then if we move on to the next photograph, this takes us right down, first of all, at the end of this to Mount Quarry House itself. From there, if we swing to the left, this is us within the garden ground of Mount Quarry to give you a view of turbine T3 from the garden. We move to the next photograph. Again, we look up the slope to the turbines at the top there. This is us within the garden ground, I say close to Mount Quarry, but looking across the intervening fields. So hopefully that will give you an impression of the landform looking up the slope. If we move to the next photograph, that will give you an impression of the eco park itself. And if we move to the next photograph, I beg your pardon, that will be the last photograph. So it might be better if we scroll back to the previous photograph just to give you an impression of the turbines as viewed up the slope. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the applicant considers that he received a positive response to the proposal at the pre-application stage, where the use of inert waste material for the formation of the bunds was not seen as a key issue. Despite this, the proposal was refused as being contrary to Local Development Plan 2 Policy 37 concerning the management of inert and construction waste. The site is on Bin Farm, close to Bin Eco Park. The proposal seeks to respond to concerns by nearby residents that the approved turbines affect residential amenity. The bunds seek to mitigate the visual impact. It is not possible to achieve this and locate the bunds in a position that would satisfy criteria A or B of Policy 37. That criteria would require the bunds to be in an industrial or brownfield area or an existing active mineral or landfill site. The proposal was seen as acceptable by the officer in terms of visual impact and landscape character change in this hummocky terrain. SEPA does not object regarding surface water drainage, and operational aspects could be addressed through planning conditions. The proposal is seen as broadly acceptable to neighbouring communities. One of the two affected residents do not object. The other objector has concerns that the proposal did not screen the turbine fully. The proposal forms a compromise between engineering design issues and the desired screening, and it will significantly improve residential amenity to a degree that is considered to accord with LDP2 policy regarding placemaking, that is policies 1A and 1B. It is also considered that the proposal would not have a detrimental effect on the landscape or generate adverse ecological, hydrological or transport impacts. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. Local Development Plan 2 Policy 37 concerning management of inert and construction waste supports the recycling and processing of inert and construction waste subject to a number of criteria. In this instance, LDP2 specifically allocates and defines future expansion of the facility, defines Bin Eco Park as a waste management site. This allocation allows for scope for future expansion of the facility if required. The site for the two bunds lies out with the designated waste management area. It is currently used as rough grazing and is a greenfield site remote from the waste management area itself. As such, it fails to meet the criteria of Policy 37, where support for waste disposal is limited to industrial and brownfield land. No processing of the material is proposed, although it could be argued that it is being repurposed to form the bunds. The positive support for the proposal as a departure to the local development plan, which was given at the pre-application stage, was given on the basis that there was support for the residential neighbours, from the residential neighbours to the east in addressing the visual impact of the turbines. The cross-sections submitted with the planning application show only partial screening of turbines 3 and 4. Parts of the turbine blades would continue to be visible. As a result, the nearby neighbour and the Community Council object to the proposal. As the purpose of the proposal was to address the perceived issue of visual amenity, the applicant was invited to increase the height of the bunds. In response, the applicant confirmed that the original design and the intention was to secure full screening. However, the height has been determined by the land available for a secure base due to the constraints of the overhead line, the presence of springs, the need to have a stable angle of slope with consistent materials, and the control of silt runoff. These technical difficulties led to a reduction in the previously proposed bund height. The applicant has requested that the proposal be determined as currently submitted. The Council accepted the proposed turbines without any requirement for the bunds. The applicant's proposal is in response to concerns raised by nearby neighbours. The justification for the bunds out with the waste management site is not assessed as sufficiently robust to justify a departure from the development plan, notably considering the objections from parties envisaged as benefiting from the bunds as currently proposed. It is anticipated that the bunds would take between 3 to 5 years to complete, potentially involving up to 10 to HGV lorry trips per day. The on-site formation of the bunds would include the use of lighting during hours of darkness. Any effect in reducing the noise from the turbines is seen as being negligible. If planning permission was being granted, a condition requiring a construction environment management plan is seen as being sufficient to minimise dust, noise, and control the speed of lorries, hours and days of operation, and any external lighting. It is also noted that the site lies within the Ochil Hills local landscape area. While the scale of the bunds would be significant, they generally follow the hummocky nature of the landscape in the immediate locality. The main visual impacts would be to the two nearest houses. The temporary impacts would be acceptable if there was sufficient benefit to the residents from the screening of the turbines in the longer term. Given the representations received, the conclusion of the landscape visual impact assessment that during construction the impact would not be significant is considered to be overstated. Nevertheless, in assessing the undulating landform and the wider landscape context, the impacts are not seen as being of such significance that would warrant the refusal of the proposal on visual amenity grounds. The traffic impact on the public road network during construction is seen as negligible, especially as inert waste material is being brought to this location at present. There are private water supplies close by. The Council's private water team has raised no objections to the proposal. Having accepted the leachability test provided, SEPA has offered no objections regarding the hydrology and hydrogeology considerations. The bedrock is igneous rock. SEPA has also accepted the assessment provided in relation to the groundwater-dependent terrestrial ecosystems. Nature Scot has accepted the findings of the ecology surveys in relation to the local SAC, SSSI and ancient woodland. It is noted that there is potential for archaeological remains within the site. In conclusion, the overriding concern relates to the proposed tipping operation out with the allocated waste management site in a form that would only provide a partial mitigation to the visual amenity of the two houses to the east. Turning now finally to representations, two representations, including Abernethy Community Council, object, mainly because the bunds would not screen the turbines fully, be located out with the waste management site, take 3 to 5 years to be formed, involving noise and light pollution, and have an impact on visual amenity and landscape character. In this case, there is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on the application for review? Councillor James.
Thanks, convener. I don't know if Mr. Harrison, one of the photographs is taken from the garden of Manquarrie House. I think it's page 17 on the PDF document you sent to us. That one there, you just gone past it. No, it's a picture taken from the garden. There, that one.
That's
the one. If you look at the bottom right hand blade, the 4 o'clock, if you like, I don't know if it's a mark, or is that the electricity pylon?
It's the electricity pylon.
Okay, so from there, the bund would actually be pretty much in line, or the end of it would be in line with the turbine itself, really, because it wouldn't actually cover the turbine from there.
Well, this is looking to T3. The position of the bund would be as from this position within the garden ground. If you go up towards the turbine, I'm looking as more or less as directly as I can at the turbine, and the bund would be on the, shall we say, the beyond the dark area, which is the gully, which has a certain amount of whin and gorse in it, which you might have seen in other earlier photographs. So it's more or less directly in line of sight from that position.
Fine. Thank you very much.
The electricity power lines.
The other question, sorry, convener. There's 10 lorries.
You dropped out for a moment there, Councillor James. Mr. Harrison, did you have another point to make while we wait for Councillor James to not freeze?
I was really just trying to be clear about the first point he was making about the power lines, which are, shall we say, you can see the poles of which slightly on the right hand side of the turbine blade there. It's that's basically more or less at the top of the slope, but slightly towards the right of the turbine. It's the photograph inevitably, because it's taken from some distance away, has foreshortened those two things in relation to each other. The poles are actually slightly downslope and to the side of the turbine, if that helps. It's not that where the poles are is not the position of the bund. The bund is more in shall we say, the direct line of sight between where we're standing in the photograph and the turbine.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. You're unfrozen now, Councillor James. Any further?
Yeah, there was another one, and yes, I did get your reply. Thank you for that. I did briefly freeze and it all went wrong. Anyway, I'm back in. The other thing, in your remarks, you were saying that it was quoted 10 lorries a day, and how many years to completely build the bunds?
Well, it seems to be given as a range between 3 and 5 years. Okay. So, but it's difficult to tell, I think, from the applicant's point of view. He doesn't necessarily know exactly how much suitable material he's going to get in that period. So I think that's why it's difficult to be very specific and definite about that.
The point I'm making is not going to be done by the summer.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any questions from you, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, please, convener. Thank you, and thanks, Mr. Harrison, for your comprehensive but succinct report. In either the applicant's submission or the report of handling, is the efficacy of having a tree bund, a tree belt on top of an 18-metre bund that's made from inert material, presumably the soil on the top. Because the very nature of inert material is probably building material, stone, etc., which I can understand will accumulate over time. Have you any thoughts on that matter, Mr. Harrison, from your vast experience in planning?
I think you've identified an understandable technical issue, you might say, of the ability to establish trees on top of what's obviously expected to be fairly free draining material, even with the use of soil. First of all, we have no detail of how that is proposed to be established, but it would be difficult not to recognise that there is a danger here from either the top material drying out in times of periods of drought, which would affect trees, and similarly, as the trees grow and become more effective potentially in terms of screening, there is the added prospect of wind blow from, shall we say, trees on material like that, especially as we're basically up in an upland area here as well, without any obvious other screening. I mean, quite clearly we have turbines there because it enjoys, shall we say, a high level of wind. So there is that prospect that the trees might have difficulty in becoming established and remaining stable.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Well, thanks, Councillor Wilson. There's not often much left to ask after Councillor Wilson, but on this occasion, I think, Mr Harrison, whilst I have no wish to oversimplify the application, am I correct in thinking that the purpose of the bunds and the trees is to protect basically Mount Quarry House from sight of the turbines, but that they are going to be of such a size that they will not actually achieve that purpose? Am I right in thinking that?
Well, as you say, there are two aspects to it. There's the actual raising of ground levels up to about sort of 18 metres, which of course is less than what was originally intended. I think it was 26 metres was hoped to be the level in order to achieve full screening. And then we have the second aspect of the trees. But you're right, the sort of the raison d'etre for the application as presented by the applicant is to improve the residential amenity of Mount Quarry principally.
Thanks. And as far as we're aware, the original application for the turbines themselves, there was never any suggestion of the requirement to have bunds in the area.
No, clearly this is a separate application following the erection of the turbines, and is a supplementary one rather than directly related to the turbines themselves. In other words, there's no obligation, as far as I'm aware, that the bunds be formed.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Harrison. Any further questions, colleagues? No. So we can move then to make a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor James?
No, I think we have enough, Convener. I'm happy to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
I concur with enough information.
Thank you. And I too am happy that we have sufficient information. So we can now proceed to assess the case and move to debate. So, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start us off. I always hesitate, colleagues, to say that an application seems to be clear-cut, but on this occasion, and I've been up the road and had a look across the fields there and noticed the turbines, I feel that on this occasion we have sufficient information, particularly having heard the planning advisor's answers to our questions, to agree with the officer's recommendation that this be refused, as indicated on page 21. It seems that it is, to me, contrary to the policy 37. It seems that this is very much in the countryside and not part of a brownfield site or part of the eco park. And moreover, the fact that it would seem that even after all the work and disruption of creating these bunds, is not going to achieve its initial purpose of screening the turbines. It's in my opinion that the reasons for refusal on this occasion are acceptable. Councillor James, may we have your view?
Yeah, thanks, convener. And like you, I looked at this and saw the application. Was it meant as a benefit of screening for the residents, or was it to get rid of waste? I've come to the my own decision that it's the latter. Even with these bunds, the blades anyway, and to be honest with you, I think that's far more of a distraction than seeing the full item. It's bad enough having that plonk right on your doorstep anyway. So that, and again, that's a personal preference, as I have one close by. So I on this occasion believe the officers have made the right decision, and I would again go along with the refusal. Thanks, convener.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Thanks, convener. In history, the Antonine Wall was only partly effective in keeping the Picts at bay. I think that this proposal has, broadly speaking, the same effect. I'm certainly very uncomfortable with an 18-metre high bund that's made from inert material with trees on the top of it. The wind, it blows a hoolie up on this site, and we've had plenty of wind of late to demonstrate that. I think the trees might struggle, to be honest. I understand the issue about residential amenity, but I think it could be ameliorated by, if we look at the picture before us, the trees in leaf would with one or two in the middle would hide close by to the house, would actually hide that turbine completely, and some evergreens might help. I think there's an alternative for the applicants, and that is to plant an eco-friendly tree belt here, because if we're talking about 5 years to get the bund established and another 5 years to for the trees to get established, then in 10 years rapidly growing species and eco-friendly species would provide some amelioration, and I think help the landscape as well. So I think they've an alternative. I know we don't, Mr. Elliott will tell us we don't have that application in front of us, and he's perfectly correct, but in backing your refusal proposal, convener, I think there are alternatives that can be explored by the applicant that I think would be far more beneficial in overall terms in the future. So I'm happy to support the planning officer's decision.
Thank you, colleagues. I think we are all of the same mind, Mr. Elliott, that this application will not achieve what it sets out to do, and we are all perfectly content with reason 1 on page 21 without any changes, unless you can advise anything you would advise to be changed in that. It all seems to be in order to me.
No, convener, it seems clear that all 3 members wish to refuse in line with the appointed officer grounded refusal, which is on page 21 of your papers, with no alterations to the grounded refusal.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Elliott. I realise that this was not the answer the applicant would want, but they have been given a few helpful suggestions, and not within our remit to insist on alternatives that might be considered. But we have given it a thorough examination. We move now, given that we are deferring item 2, we move now to item 3, which is item 4.3, should I say, which is the review of condition 3 on planning permission 210065 FFL, which was for the erection of a dwelling house in land 80 metres north of Castlecroft, Forgan-Denny. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. As you say, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house and access at land 80 metres north of Castlecroft, Forgan-Denny. However, the appeal seeks the rewording or removal of condition number 3 of the planning permission for this development, which has already been granted, of course. That condition states the foul drainage for the development shall be drained to the mains public sewerage system. And the reason given for the condition is to ensure an appropriate drainage arrangement is installed in the interests of the amenity of the area and for the protection of the water environment. The applicant wishes to meet the drainage needs for the proposal via a private drainage system. And now maybe just take you through the photographs now, but you might like to have page 403 and also page 411 to hand, that provides you with the location plan and site plans, and the latter providing you with the proposed drainage line from the proposed house. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching from the south, the site itself, and then the adjoining watercourses. So I say in the first photograph we have here, this is us coming, I say, into Forgandenny down the access road and passing the junction with School Road. Now, School Road, of course, is referred to in the papers because that's the nearest place that the applicant would be able to make his connection to the public system. So if we move up the road a little bit in that next photograph, I suspect that this is the drainage manhole cover just at the junction of School Road and the access road. And I suspect that if there was to be a connection to the end of the road there, it would probably go down the verge that we're looking at, straight down the access road. That would seem to be the most likely direction. So moving down the access road, from there we get to the access into a place called Lambs Park, which is referred to in the location plan you got. And it's a shared access with Castlecroft. Castlecroft itself appears to have two means of access, one close to Forgandenny and another one that you'll see in a later photograph. So from that sort of position, I say the next photograph is us swinging round towards the left. You're just getting the corner of the access shown there with the gate pillar. And this is Castlecroft itself, a relatively modern house. And again, you see this area of verge, which might be where the, should we say, any drainage might be capable of being accommodated. But what you'll also notice in this photograph is that the access road is, as it were, falling away as we move towards the application site, which is slightly around the corner in the far distance of the left-hand side of the photograph there. So from there, if we can move on to the next photograph, we go down the road towards that second access I mentioned there. So this is the start of the application site itself. This is the northern access to Castlecroft, and of course, as I say, would be a shared entry serving the application site. So from there, if we go down the road again a little bit further in the next photograph, we turn round and look back up past that access towards Castlecroft, and of course outline the application site for the new house in red there, just to orientate you as far as that's concerned. But you can see again that in that direction, the land is rising up the way towards Castlecroft, and then it will be rising up further to get to School Road. From that position, in the next photograph, we swing slightly to the left. We look across the main body of the application site, which again generally falls further down as we're getting towards the watercourse. And then if we swing to the left of that photograph again, we catch the corner of the application site for the new house and look up the gully, which contains the little burn, as it were, which the applicant is envisaging would accommodate the runoff, as it were, from the soakaway, which would be the private facility. Castlecroft, of course, is served by a private facility at present. So from there, in the next photograph, we look down to just give you an indication of the burn that's there that passes through that gully. This is us looking down from the access road. It gives you some indication of the quantity of water which might be normally in the burn. And then swinging round to the right in the next photograph, we look up towards the application site and Castlecroft again from the access road. You can probably just make out the burn on the extreme left-hand side of the photograph and the land which the drainage would go through. And then we, as it were, in the next photograph, go over to the other burn on the opposite side of the road. So as I say, there's a second burn coming through the woodland which joins the burn which would accommodate the soakaway. So if we could just scroll back to the previous photograph, I'll leave you with that one, just to give you an indication of the application site relative to the burn. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the applicants envisaged building the house for their retirement purposes and transferring the existing house, that's Castle Croft, to their grandson. The site lies within the garden of Castle Croft and within the settlement of Forgandenny. The planning application indicated the intention to link the proposed house to the existing private drainage arrangement that serves Castle Croft and discharges downslope to the burn to the north. The technical feasibility of this arrangement was assessed by an engineer in preparing the proposal. While other technical matters were scrutinised during the processing of the planning application, the drainage aspect as submitted was not queried by the planning officer. Consequently, the condition requiring linkage to the public main drainage system was unexpected. The applicant's engineer has concluded that linking to the public mains drain in School Road is technically feasible. However, this is assessed as unviable due to the 220-metre distance and the 8-metre difference in levels that would necessitate more than a domestic pumping system. In addition, SEPA are content with the outflow from the proposed discharge to the burn, and the Council's flood team are content with the proposed SUDS aspect. Turning now in summary to the Officer's report of handling, the proposal was assessed as complying with Local Development Plan Policy 17, residential areas, as an infill development. The site lies within the settlement and would not have an adverse impact on the setting of the adjoining listed building, that's Forgandenny Church, or Forgandenny Conservation Area, or the trees within the conservation area. The proposal was also not assessed as raising concerns regarding red squirrels, flooding, overlooking, overshadowing, or inadequate amenity space. Access is also seen as satisfactory, subject to the construction works taking account of the structural stability of the road and the steep embankment. Potential archaeological matters can be addressed through a watching brief during the site works. A detailed SUD scheme requires to be approved. Turning to the section which described foul drainage and related matters, and to quote directly from the report, Scottish Water confirmed the development would be serviced by the Forgandenny wastewater treatment works, but are unable to confirm capacity at this time. Conditional control can secure a connection to the public system in line with policy 53B, water environment and drainage, foul drainage. It is noted that a reduced transport infrastructure contribution is required, but no education contribution. In this case, there were no representations. There is, however, a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener, and again, thanks again, Mr. Harrison, for your presentation. It's helped clarify some things in my mind. There's been discussion about the foul disposal, but what about surface water? Is it included in the applicant's proposal? I understand from reading the papers that it is, but I just want to make it quite clear that the surface water, of which there would be a reasonable amount, would also be treated in the same way.
Well, it might not be treated in exactly the same way, in the sense that there would have to be a SUDS provision, and so that might be independent of the actual soak-away provision. But certainly the suggestion is that that first of all can be addressed, and it is also suggested that slightly more detail might be needed to be absolutely sure about that. But there's an expectation that the applicant can actually meet the SUDS requirement for, as I say, the runoff from the hard surfaces of the one dwelling house.
Thank you. What I meant was in the same way. I realise this needs to be separate systems, but
Yeah.
in essence, the surface water could land up after due SUDS processing in the burn. Yes,
I think the geography of the site, as you can probably see from the photograph, it's almost inevitable that's what would happen. Yes.
There's sufficient space, Mr. Harrison, within the site to create, and this is, I'm asking for your view as a planner, to provide an appropriate SUDS facility.
Yes, either within the site, or my understanding is the applicant owns additional land as well. So shall we say, again, looking at the photograph, my understanding is that the applicant owns the rough area down to the burn.
And that could be the site of a SUDS. Yeah.
Indeed, yes.
The biodiversity benefit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor James, have you any questions for officers?
Thanks, convener. Following Councillor Wilson, absolutely not. I'm quite happy with the information we've got. Thank you.
I just said one point is to be absolutely clear. It's the applicant's contention that connecting to the main sewage would be too expensive. But am I right in thinking there is no indication anywhere of the costs for us to be able to come to that conclusion ourselves?
The papers, as far as I'm aware, don't contain estimates of what that would actually cost. There are references, as I say, to the 200 plus meters that would have to meet the connection, but also this matter of the difference in levels in the order of 8 meters, which would require a pumping system, and the suggestion is a substantial pumping system in order to achieve the drainage uphill to School Road.
Right. And, am I right then in thinking School Road is the only place that a connection could be made?
It's the only connection that's referred to that I understand in the papers. I might draw your attention to page 403, which gives you as far as the information I have, the drainage arrangement as far as the public system is concerned in Forgan-Denny. You'll see Castlecroft clearly identified in that, and shall we see, the black dot above Castlecroft to the north is approximately the position of the proposed house. There appears to be at least a possibility, and I stress the word possibility, that if you couldn't go, as it were, south to School Road, could you go east and make a connection to the sewer as it's going, shall we say, in that northerly direction out with the village? There's no reference to that. Whether that's possible, I suspect the geography of that may make that expensive in a different way, because you're having to try and cross a gully. You probably will have to negotiate with another landowner. You'd have to go through woodland. So while that's not explored, it wouldn't surprise me if that might even be, at least if not more, an expensive option, even though it's a more direct route in terms of distance and would appear to be beneficial in terms of the levels, as the level on the sewer there is well, approximately 3 meters below the level of the site in broad terms, but it would seem to provide different difficulties.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. And given Castlecroft has a similar system to that which is being proposed, Would I be right in thinking that one or two of the houses on the periphery of Forgandenny have the same arrangement?
Well, certainly the papers do refer to a couple of houses enjoying, so we see a private arrangement rather than a public arrangement for their drainage facilities. There's part of reference to that as to the houses and relatively recent houses. So it's not a case that 100% of the houses in Forgandenny are on the public system, but the presumption is, as you'd expect within a settlement, that the public system is used rather than having a multitude of private systems. I think you're muted, convener.
Thank you, Mr. Hazard, protecting you all from my coughing there. I'm back on now. Thank you. So I think colleagues are in a position now to make a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor James.
I have enough information, thanks, convener, and I'm happy to proceed.
Right, Councillor Wilson.
I'm happy to proceed, and the photographs in this instance have been particularly helpful.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor Wilson, and I too have sufficient information to make a decision. So we will now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor James, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, Perth Ross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off? Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. Having seen, as Councillor Wilson's just pointed out, the excellent photographs and the map on page 403 of our papers, which gives you the map of the current system. Private systems aren't unusual in Perthshire. You know, we do live in a rural county, and it's pretty normal. Given the distance to cover and the angle, you know, the 8-metre height difference worries me a little. That's got to be a substantial pump to drive that up the 8-metre slope, and given over the last couple of weeks the amount of power cuts we've seen ourselves, I worry what would happen in the event of a pump failure. I'm happy that SEPA have given it a big tick and said they're quite happy with it. So I've no reason to doubt their expertise. And if I'm honest, convener, I'd be quite happy to allow this removal of the condition. Thank you
very much, Councillor James. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Thanks, convener. The only thing that we have to decide on is the condition. The House has an approval already. In normal circumstances, convener, I would have been in favour of the condition being imposed as on a point of principle. However, I think the applicants have made a good case in this instance for an exemption from that, and I think the practicality, and again the photographs were particularly helpful in looking at the potential and proposed route for the drainage to go both the surface water and the foul water. It's over 200 metres, I think, Mr. Harrison, if I'm correct, and it involves hard surfaces as well as soft surfaces. It involves access to other land that's not in the ownership or control of the applicant. It would either be other private properties or publicly owned land or council land. I think the cost would have a substantial number of nothings beside it. I'm not going to put a figure on that. I'm not a consulting engineer for a moment, but you can see to put in drainage over 200 metres is a substantial amount of cost. I take on board Councillor James's point about the ongoing cost and maintenance of a pumping system. 8 metres, and it looks as if it's a good 8 metres to me from the photograph we're looking at. It's a substantial amount of pumping, and I don't think that's eco-friendly. We have a site where gravity can assist the process. Pretty obvious, and if SEPA and other regulatory authorities are happy with that, and we impose, I think, I don't know if there's a condition on that, that instead of the condition we've got, convener, I don't know if it's competent for us to ask for advice on what type of condition would require to be introduced to ensure that the drainage system complies with all the necessary regulatory requirements. And that's maybe a rather clumsy way to put it, but I think you'll get the feeling of what I'm about, convener. So I'm happy to seek to withdraw the condition, but I would want to safeguard the ability of the council to control the private drainage development.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Before I make my view, Mr Harrison and Mr Elliott, would it be helpful to address Councillor Wilson's point whether we should, rather than delete this condition, substitute it with another one? Is that necessary in your opinion? If so, how would we do this?
If I come in first, Mr
Yes,
Harrison can supplement, but on the existing permission for the house, I'm looking at page 416 of your papers, maybe of assistance to explain that it's already conditioned for the SUD system. Now, I know that wasn't quite what you mentioned, but that's already there. And in terms of the private drainage system, Mr Harrison will answer better than I, but you already have other regulated systems that will deal with that. You've got information from SEPA about that, so there wouldn't be a need to condition that. That's dealt with through other regulated systems. However, I'll defer to Mr Harrison and his greater knowledge whether there would be an alternative that would be appropriate.
Thank you. No, you've effectively taken the words out of my mouth that the quality of the discharge really lies principally with SEPA, and I wouldn't consider it essential, as it were. And we go back to the tests as to whether is this necessary as a condition, and I think that's doubtful. As Mr Elliott's made it clear that there actually is control over that through another body.
Thanks very much.
But I'm happy to accept that.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson, could you just confirm that you're content with that?
Sorry, I spoke over you, convener. I do apologise. It's not often I do that. I'm content to accept that advice.
Right, thank you, Councillor Wilson, and you're just dead keen, and no one can accuse you of not being dead keen to make your point. Thank you. So I think my view, colleagues, is very similar. As Councillor Wilson says, ordinarily we would expect connection to the public sewer where possible. But it seems here there is, I think as it says in the papers, no technical reason why a private drainage supply is not acceptable. My only issue, and I'm not disagreeing with my colleague's view, my only issue is I think if an applicant is expecting us to accept that an alternative connection of some kind or something to do with a condition is to be too expensive, I think it would be very helpful to have had an indication of costs. I don't see much point in saying something's going to be expensive if you don't demonstrate the costs involved. However, I think we can see from the maps and from the photographs, and certainly when you're there looking at that site, although the photographs are excellent, it perhaps doesn't show you quite how the extent to which that slope really does fade away very, very sharply towards the burn. Given all that, I would agree with my colleagues, and I feel that on this occasion, and on this particular occasion only, I am happy to delete condition 3 and allow this retirement home to proceed. So I think, Mr Elliott, once again, we're all in complete agreement. Are you happy that you have everything that you require?
Yes, Convener, it's very clear. It's a straightforward agree the review and remove condition 3.
That's it. Well, I realise the applicants will be pleased with this result, and I think we can all wish them well in their new retirement home when it eventually gets built. So, colleagues, if we can now move on to item 4.4, which is an application for the erection of a dwelling house in principle in land 100 metres northeast of Blairfordle Farm, Kelty. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. Just to repeat what you said there, as you say, it's a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 100 metres northeast of Blairfordle Farm by Kelty. The site and the adjoining land in the applicant's ownership is a flat area of rough grazing. Access would be via an unsurfaced track entering off the existing private cul-de-sac serving the Blair Forge group of houses. The applicant envisages erecting a single-storey house. I'll just take you to the photographs now, but you might like to have page 579 to hand and other drawings onwards to provide a location plan and site plan. The general sequence of the photographs, as you can see in the first photograph here, is approaching the access track through Blair Forge, the access track and the adjoining land, the applicant's holding, and the application site context. So say in the first photograph here, we're entering off the public road into the cul-de-sac that serves Blair Forge. And the first section of road here is publicly adopted, but it becomes a private road very quickly. So if we move from that position up the access road, we turn across the wee bridge and turn the corner, and there's a further row of all, shall we say, modern houses and bungalows in the main as we go up the access road. And it's a one-sided development, as it were. There are fields on the left-hand side of the photograph there. As again, from that position, we carry up the access route to the next photograph, as it were, turn round that corner, and we see the remaining houses, and finally the house under construction, which was actually a case dealt with by the local review body on the site of a former piggery site. I say this will give you more of a context of that group of houses, but also the rising ground behind this, I say, which is slightly wooded, which you'll see in later photographs. So from there we continue up the private access road and turn round, as it were. We see the house under construction, this former piggery site, and you can see the road is starting to, the tarmac, as it were, is starting to run out at this point. The gate we're just picking up in the photograph on the left-hand side here is the entry into the track. So if we swing round to the left in the next photograph, we get the gate and start looking down that track into the distance. And just from the same position, just to give you an indication of the context at the entry to the track, if we swing round to the left in the next photograph, we're still just catching the corner of the gate and the fence there into another area of ground and the rising ground beyond, which I've mentioned earlier. And you'll see in this photograph there's a gas pipeline at that point. And then if we move to the left again in the next photograph, if we can, we're actually looking up the track where the tarmac, of course, has run out by this stage. This is the continuation of the cul-de-sac up the hill, as it were, and this is part of the core path network, which is referred to in the papers. So swinging in the opposite direction towards the right, in the next photograph we start going down the path. This is the track, I should say. This is about halfway down that first section of the track. I've tried to orientate you a little bit by referring to one or two things that will crop up in later photographs. So there's a green unit, as it were, that you see in the distance there. Which will crop up in the next photograph. So we carry on down the access track, and there we have the green unit where the first of the corners take place. And the road takes a bit of a twist at this point. I say hopefully you'll be able to identify that in the location plan. but we're starting to refer to a white unit in the distance again. So if we go down the track a little bit further to that corner, we can see the next section of track towards the white unit. As you can see, it's quite a long run into the application site proper, as it were, and you're maybe just beginning to pick up on the right-hand side of the photograph adjacent to the track, and if we move to the next photograph, you'll see that in more detail, an area of what appears to be tipping, which this is, so the access, and what I'm really trying to say is the access seems to be being used for more than an access to the application site. You'll see Blairfordle Farm on the horizon, as it were, beyond the tipping area. So if we now carry on further up the track, there's a second tipping area, again just illustrating the multiple use of the track. And from that position, if we swing round to the left, in the next photograph we pick up the white unit that was referred to in the earlier photographs, and we have Blairfordle Farm on the horizon again. So there, again, swinging round to the left from that similar position, we start to actually enter the main part of the application site. So this is us moving in to the land beyond, and so if we move from there up the access track, entering the main part of the application site in the next photograph, this is us entering the main body of it. I've tried to illustrate the extent of the land in the applicant's ownership. I thought it easier to show the whole area in red as the application site, but I appreciate the actual site of the house is only one corner of this, but it seemed simpler to show it as one colour, otherwise it would become almost too confusing visually. So from that corner, as we enter into the land holding of the applicant, we swing round to the left, looking east, and this is us looking across that should we say corner of the application site, looking in a northeasterly direction. You may notice there is a certain amount of development which seems to have taken place on adjoining ground. So if we move from there in the next photograph towards the corner of that field, we can look back towards what was the white unit, and beyond that the Fordle Farm. So there's a number of photographs now as we sweep round towards the left. The next photograph, we look up the main body, as it were, of the land holding, and for ease of reference, I've added that there's a sort of a west field, and then which is probably as we move towards the application site, we have an east field, and then in the far corner what I called a south field. So there's sort of three elements to the land holding, but the position of the actual house I've identified there, and you'll see that in later photographs. So if we swing to the left of that, again in the next photograph, we see the adjoining land. And as I mentioned, a certain amount of activity taking place there. From there, we move up towards the house site in the next photograph, and this is us looking back to the west field. I say there's a fence line you'll see on your plans at that point. So in the next photograph, we swing round to the left. We look past the gate again, and you can pick up the white unit once more. That's the west field, and then if we move round, swing round again to the left. In the next photograph, we see the fence that divides between the west and the east field, and the dog leg in the boundary at that point. And in the far distance again, Blairfordle Farm. Swinging round again to the left. Oh, I'm not quite sure what's happened.
That's all the photographs I have as well, Mr. Harrison, which were in the set sent out to us.
Ah, right, okay. I'm not quite sure what has happened in the process there. We seem to be a little short of the application site, but hopefully that gives you an indication that basically the holding and the site is a continuous area of relatively level, rough grazing, within which there is a corner devoted to the siting of the proposed house that's adjacent to some of the rising ground I mentioned earlier, which is tree lined, but the general views towards the west and towards the south are open. So I'll maybe turn to the applicant's case in summary. The applicant considers that the proposal is supported by Local Development Plan Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside guidance under two of the categories. Firstly, in providing a house for a local person under category 3.4. The applicant has lived in the area for over 3 years and is inadequately housed due to her limited and decreasing mobility. The applicant has lived in Kelty since 2017 with her husband and son. Since then, her health has deteriorated due to a number of degenerative health conditions. Despite adaptations to her existing house, it is seen as unsuitable for her needs, notably because she anticipates being wheelchair bound in the near future. She has been looking for a single-storey house or plot within the urban area for the last 5 years, without success. As she has been unable to find suitable accommodation in the locality, she is therefore seeking to build a purpose-built house in the countryside. A personal statement providing more details of her circumstances can be found on page 595. Secondly, for creating a form of sustainable living under category 3.5. The proposed house is seen as essential to work the remaining land suitably and sustainably, and for the applicant to become largely self-supporting and provide in the form of a small holding. The applicant also has intentions to undertake significant tree planting. It is considered that any concerns regarding potential flooding could be dealt with through a planning condition governing finished floor levels and water-resistant materials, as has been done previously elsewhere locally. The lack of a flood risk assessment relating to surface water only is not seen as an appropriate reason for refusal, notably when there is sufficient land to provide suitable drainage elsewhere within the holding. The development is seen as following a similar pattern to the houses at Blair Forge. The site of the house is seen as having strong natural boundaries and landscape framework, including the disused railway embankment, woodland and field boundaries. The site is not visible from the public road. The site would enjoy a high standard of amenity and would not have any adverse impact on the amenity of any other houses, natural heritage assets or road safety. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the proposal falls to be assessed against LDP 2 Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside supplementary guidance. The applicant's supporting statement indicates that the site should be and could be considered under category 3.4 and 3.5 of the policy and guidance. Category 3.4 is intended to allow households who already live in the rural area to build a new house where they are either in insecure or unsuitable accommodation and in limited circumstances. The applicant's supporting statement shows that her existing house is unsuitable for her needs. However, while it is her preference and desire, her requirement to live in a rural countryside location is not considered to have been demonstrated. Whilst the applicant feels living in a rural area would be beneficial to her health, this in itself does not constitute a requirement. the applicant's search within Kelty and the surrounding area for a new home or plot to suit her needs is noted. However, an absence of suitable alternative accommodation has not been fully demonstrated. This information has not been requested as the proposal is not considered to meet the broader criteria as a definable site or the criteria of providing accommodation under category 3.4. Under category 3.5, the issue is whether or not the proposal provides sustainable living. This is not considered to be relevant to the assessment of this as an in-principle application. The supplementary guidance states that in-principle proposals will not normally be accepted under this category. Furthermore, under category 3, all proposals are required to meet the broader siting criteria. As the site comprises the corner of a field, it is seen as undefined and therefore is not seen as complying with the broad criteria of the guidance. In conclusion, while sympathetic to the applicant's personal circumstances, the proposal cannot be supported as the case has not been made under 3.4 of the policy, and the site does not have adequate containment to meet the siting criteria. The site is seen as being remote from other development. Regarding other considerations, the Call Authority has removed their initial objections, provided that any consent is subject to appropriate conditions. The access onto the public road is acceptable to transport planning. Any potential damage to the private access road through Blair Forge is seen as a civil matter and not a material planning consideration. The site is identified as potentially being affected by surface water flooding. Further information was not requested regarding this consideration as the proposal was not supported due to more fundamental policy concerns. Turning now to representations, there were 15 representations to this proposal, 14 of which were objections and 1 were providing support. Regarding the objections, the proposal was mainly seen as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy 2, that no information on drainage, water supply or flood risk had been provided. It was considered that there was no coal report. There were no supporting documents in relation to the potential adverse effect on visual amenity or the impact on the proposal being out of character with the area. There were concerns expressed regarding road safety and traffic impacts and also damage to the bridge and access at Blair Forge. And then the concern regarding a potential impact on the right-of-way and its use. In relation to support, it was considered the proposal provided a positive impact to the visual amenity of the area, and there was a need for such development. In this case, there is no request for a site visit, and there is no request for a hearing either. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. So, colleagues, are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. And again, thanks again, Mr. Harrison. I'm on page 579 again, as you referred to, and the title says land 100 metres northeast of local farm. On page 579, it's Blair Fordle Farm, Mr. Harrison, away down in the centre bottom of that particular plan.
Yes, you're seeing the sort of some of the outbuildings associated with Blair Fordle. Is
that in your opinion 100 metres away?
I suspect there has maybe been a miscalculation in the scale. I think it actually is probably closer to about 300 metres.
Okay, thank you. And the distance from the, if you like, the building group of Blair Forgy. I mean, is that 500 plus meters away as the crow flies, but and maybe longer? But
I think it's probably slightly in excess of 700 meters.
thank you. My second question, if I may, convener.
Yes, indeed, Councillor Wilson.
Is relating to the next page at 580, I think, which shows a location plan in the Blairfordle Wood and a road access to the main road. Is it we're not sure what that form of access is, Mr. Harrison, and is it intended to use that as an access, or the access from Blair Forgy?
Well, the application site makes it clear that the access envisaged is, I say, through Bear Forge, through both the access you saw in the first photographs, yeah, which is surfaced, and then the unsurfaced track. There would appear, at least historically, to be a loop road, as it were, for the continuation of that access to link through to Bearfordle Farm, but that doesn't appear to be part of the intended means of access.
I just want to clarify that the route that we followed through your photographs is the application intended route for access.
Indeed, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor James, any questions from you?
Convener, the beauty of going after Councillor Wilson is you guaranteed to have had your question already answered. So thank you. Nothing from me.
I've still got something for you, Mr. Harrison. I noticed when I was there on Saturday that the rain was even worse than when I was up looking at the item 1. But how would you characterise the agricultural use of that area? Because it seemed to me then, and from your photographs, that there's lots of industrial sort of units of one sort or another. There's lots of caravans. There's a fair bit of tipping and piles of pallets and so forth. Very little evidence to me of any agricultural use in that area. How would you characterise the area there?
As you say, there appears to be more than one activity taking place. Obviously, the address is Blairfordle Farm. It appeared that, certainly my impression was that rough grazing would be the main agricultural activity taking place. And in the photograph you see in front of you here, the East Field certainly was recently, obviously had horses in it. I didn't tend to see much in the way of livestock, agricultural livestock in the area. The horses were the only livestock I saw, and the other fields do not appear to be being cultivated, if I can put it that way. It's more likely that they're used for rough grazing. Having said that, I think there were some cows in one corner of a field close by, now that I come to think of it in detail. But generally speaking, the land didn't seem to be in a particularly intensive agricultural use, and clearly, as you've seen from some of the other photographs, there were other activities involving landfill or tipping.
Right, and with regards to the condition of the track, I didn't venture along the second bit after the piggery in my car. I mean, to sign out some sort of tractor, 4-wheel drive vehicle from the council to visit some of these sites. The track itself, is it only the first bit within the field that is in the ownership of the applicant, and relying on others to maintain the track that goes to the piggery?
Well, the track that goes to the piggery, you say. I mean, the first section is the surface track, which is in private ownership, and certainly third parties have questioned the entitlement of gaining access to the proposed house. Again, that's of course a civil matter. It's not completely clear, I would suggest, as to who owns the track or who has rights of access across the track. I can only assume the applicant at least has rights of access, but as you're probably aware from, I'm just seeing if I can get it to hand here, one of the plans submitted shows, I'm thinking of page 675 now. Clearly that shows a number of subdivisions of the original farm, and the tracks mentioned in that, and certainly a couple of applications. So who actually owns what is what I mean is I don't think it's necessarily completely straightforward. Right.
Maybe beyond the scope of today's considerations anyway. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mr. Harrison. I have no further questions. Councillor James, Councillor Wilson, anything further from you? No. You're both quite happy. So I think.
Sorry, convener.
Yes, on your go, Councillor James. Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Just another silly question. Well, there's no such thing as a silly question. On the map, which Mr. Harrison pointed us to on, I think it was page 580. It says that there's a pond. Now, I use Google Maps an awful lot, and I can't for the life of me. I can see the site, which looks pretty industrial to me, to be honest, but I can't for the life of me see the pond as a reference marker on Google Maps. Was that pond there when you went, Mr. Harrison?
I have to say that I didn't actually cross the wee burn and the barbed wire fence to actually go and look at whether the pond was present or not. I think judging by the lie of the land, I get the impression the pond is possibly what you might call a wet depression. It may be an area that, shall we say, floods from time to time, rather than a major feature in the landscape.
Right.
Thank you for that. Thanks.
Okay. If we're now content, colleagues, we can proceed to make a preliminary decision, I think. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor James.
With Mr. Harrison's brilliant take through and the papers, we've got quite a lot of papers here. I'm happy with the information. I'm happy to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Wilson, are you happy to proceed?
Likewise, I'm happy to proceed.
Yes, I think we have plenty of information as well. So I'm happy to proceed as well. So we will assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth North Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Well, this has been, the photographs have been particularly illuminating on this occasion. I note your comments, Convener, your questions regarding a number of containers and a number of materials. That's not what we're here to judge today, but perhaps the planning enforcement might like to visit the site in due course, Convener. However, the application that's before us is for a house that is at the, whether it's the end of the track or along the track is still for some debate. However, it's in a very rural location, and the key issue in this is the houses in the countryside policy. And having read the papers carefully and having looked at all the photographs in the papers, and also had the photographs which we had yesterday in advance of the meeting, and also Mr. Harrison's description of them, I have to strongly agree with the planning service on this one, and their reasons for refusal. I want just to expand on that a little bit, if I may, Convener. I read very carefully the submission from the lady concerned in the application, and as all of you in the room will know, I've got an extreme amount of empathy and understanding of people with disability and the use of wheelchairs and mobility scooters in particular. But I've got to say, having had photographs of the access road, the proposed access route to the house, then whilst it may be attractive to have a house in a field location, and no doubt in due course extra biodiversity, there is no way anybody could gain access or egress from the house without vehicular assistance, either in a wheelchair or a scooter. And I think that's one important thing that we need to consider about it. Now, the family may have arrangements to facilitate access and egress and entry, but there's no way that you could gain independent access even to go for 50 yards down the road. I just want to demonstrate, I read that case very, very carefully. I return to the text and I'm on page 599, convener, but I can narrate some detail later on, but I would be proposing that we accept the reasons for refusal on page 599 with some additional wording, but I'll come to the additional wording when other members have indicated what their thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that's the best sequence of events, Councillor Wilson. We may have other things to add ourselves. So, Councillor James, will we have your view?
My view is pretty much the same as Councillor Wilson. Made some excellent points. I can't for the life of me see why you'd have to go all the way around the houses, so to speak, you know, miles up a lane which is, well, you can get down it convener. I think it's totally inappropriate where it is, and I think the planners have made the right decision in this instance. I'm also mortified by the amount of fly tipping I've seen in the photographs, and like Councillor Wilson says, that's not for this forum, but certainly would like to see something done about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. For my part, I've been down there a few times on LRB business recently to nearby sites, and I was certainly struck by how remote this proposed site would be from anything remotely like civilization, and it'd be quite an exercise to access the house. But I would say that it isn't often we get an application that fails at every aspect of the housing in the countryside policy. But I think on this occasion, I too agree with the officers that there is a failure to comply here with anything in the housing and countryside policy as far as I can see. And on this occasion, once again, Mr. Elliott, we're in complete agreement that we would uphold the reasons for refusal. And I think if now would be appropriate time to hear anything additional Councillor Wilson might want, and then Councillor James and I can comment on that. Councillor Wilson, over to you.
Thanks, convener. I'm on page 599, and the reasons for refusal, number 1, I'm content with these up until the second last line, and in the second last line, the words that are in particular the site. Well, I think the proposal is a better word than site. The proposal does not comply with Category 1 building groups as it is detached and distant from any group of buildings. So I'll say that again, and I'll leave it with officers to tidy up any minor stuff, but it does not comply with Category 1 building groups as it is detached and distant from any group of buildings. And convener, as a justification, the 100 metres is 300 metres, and the hamlet, if I can call it that, of Blair Forgy is 700 metres away, and therefore there's no link whatsoever with any group of buildings. And I'd like to add, if I might, convener, you can indulge me, and I was making some notes as we went on, so I'm hoping I can read my own writing now. But and I don't know if this is an extra reason or or in addition to the reason. I'll leave Mr. Elliott and Mr. Harrison to decide on that. But further, that it has not been demonstrated. Further, that it has not been demonstrated that the proposal lies with category 3 new houses in the open countryside. Comply with category 3 dash new houses in the open countryside. Now that's a wee bit in shorthand, I think, convener, but I wonder if Councillor James and yourself would be prepared to accept these one amendment and one addition to the reasons for refusal.
Councillor James.
More than happy, convener, makes sense.
Yeah, I too, assuming Mr. Elliott, Mr. Harrison can cope, I'm quite happy with that as well. Councillor, I just have one point of clarification from officers, if I may. In the reference in my last line to reason 1, there is the talk of the building group. Is there any indication which building group they're talking about? Because there's nowhere that close, and in fact the Blair Forge one is further away than the other one.
I'm happy to defer to Mr. Harrison, but I think what Councillor Wilson has just narrated kind of clarifies that it's detached and distant from any group of buildings, so that's taking care of that.
Right, I see. I'm happy then with that. Mr. Harrison, have you anything to add there?
No, that was actually what I was going to say. The alteration that's been made to insert the word any makes it clear that there's more than one, and the distances are still large.
Right, I'm quite happy with that. So, Mr. Elliott, are you happy you have a form of words there?
Yes, convener. We still have to. I don't know if perhaps the easiest. What I'll do is I'll kind of narrate the changes that I have heard. But Councillor Wilson, do you want to go on to ground 2? Are there any changes to ground 2?
Councillor Wilson,
I can perhaps assist members in that.
Sorry,
perhaps should be a technical change. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Wilson.
I put the papers down on the floor. It's a very small desk. I'm sorry. We're back on 599 again. I don't have a proposed alteration to reason 2.
Right. Perhaps just for technical reasons, members of the usual tidy up, could I suggest that it reads as Local Development Plan 2 in brackets 2019, just the max for consistency reasons, what we do elsewhere?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, convener, what I have with ground number 1, and I'm only it stays the same except for the last sentence onwards, and I'll just narrate what I have, that it becomes, in particular, the proposal does not comply with the category 1 building groups as it is detached and distant from any group of buildings. And then I think it's appropriate to run on the sentence that Councillor Wilson used, not a separate reason. It would be further, it has not been demonstrated that the proposal complies with category 3 new houses in the opening countryside. And of course, there's a change to ground 2, just to kind of clarify, it's the Local Development Plan 2 2019. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Are you happy, Councillor Wilson, that Mr. Elliott was paying attention to your view?
He's paid, as usual, immaculate attention, convener.
Right, thank you very much indeed. So that's a unanimous decision again. I realise this will most definitely not be the outcome the applicant was looking for, but I hope that you have been able to pay attention to the points we have made and to give further consideration to any other application you might make. So I see, colleagues, it's at 12:10 according to my computer. I think I propose there's one item left to go, so I think we will get done before lunch. And I propose a 10-minute break just now, just so that we're ready to go at 12:20. So if we see you all back here at 12:20, okay?
Thank you, convener.
Thank you.
Hello, is anybody there?
Right, colleagues, I make that 20 past 12. We all seem to be back, refreshed and raring to go. So we will move to the last item for today, item 5, which is an application previously considered. And this is a planning application for the erection of 3 dwelling houses on land 30 metres southwest of Leyland House and 50 metres southeast of Tillyochie Farmhouse, Ballado. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the erection of 3 dwelling houses at land southwest of Leyland House and 50 metres southeast of Tillyochie Farmhouse, Ballado. The application site is in 2 parts, one comprising plots 1 and 2 and another comprising plot 3. The public road passes between these areas. There are also a variety of houses and farm buildings at this location, which lies in the countryside. This proposal follows up on an earlier planning permissions for the same development. And I'll just take you through the photographs to remind you. Page 7 to 9 onwards might be helpful to provide you a location plan, site plan and plans of the houses. The general sequence of the photographs, as you'll see in the first photograph here, views from the adjoining public road, and then the context of plot number 3, and then the context of the combined plots 1 and 2. This is looking now from the A91 to the combined plots towards the south. And then if we move from that position, as you'll see the general landscape context there with the farm buildings, we then move to the next, and we're approaching, I suspect what has happened here, we actually have the, just for clarity, we have some older photographs which refer to the plot numbers incorrectly. So plot number 1 is actually plot number 3, just to be absolutely clear about that. So moving, say, to the public road as we approach Tillyochie from the east, you can see the general nature of the fairly open landscape there. Then we have the group of farm buildings, and beyond that, a group of trees. The red line, of course, indicates plot number 3 in this particular instance. So from there, if we move up the road, again, just to be clear, we're looking at plot number 3, the independent plot. In the original plans, there was a position for a drainage treatment facility identified in that general locality, the corner of the field. You'll have probably noted from your papers that the position of drainage changes somewhat from one application to another historically, but that was one of the positions shown originally. So if we move on from that photograph, in the next photograph, we're looking at the land adjacent to plot number 3 and say part of the open field. Swing round to the right in the next photograph. We look at the land behind Tillyochie Farmhouse as it is, obviously the substantial building in the right-hand side of the photograph. And you can see the road swinging round on that right-hand side of the photograph and just beginning to pick up some of the agricultural buildings on the opposite side of the road. As you'll see, you've got Tillyochie Farmhouse. Beyond that, a bungalow, which again will appear in later photographs as well. So if we move on from there, we swing round towards the right, and that takes in the agricultural buildings, a combination of, as it were, traditional buildings, and then more contemporary or modern buildings. And if we swing round again to the right of that photograph, we look past the last of the buildings to a yard and caravan area which is lying to the north of the farm buildings, which you might have picked up from the first photograph. Swinging back again towards the left, one of the farm buildings appears to be in another use, in this case in relation to Christmas trees. And then if we swing round to the right of that photograph, we look across the landscape towards the Lomond Hills and Loch Leven in the far distance. Again, this is the land adjacent to plot number 3. And if we swing round to the right of that photograph, we see the entry into the round, as it were, the side of the farmhouse to go to plot number 3 to the rear. And I maybe just mention, obviously this photograph was taken some time ago when the application was first being considered by the LRB. And so the photographs you have within the papers show that access now being surfaced in hardcore material. From there, we step past the farmhouse in the next photograph. So we see the entry going down the side of the field and then coming into the plot itself to the rear of the farmhouse. So again, this just shows the context of the landscape adjacent to the plot on that eastern side. Swinging now to the right of that photograph slightly, we enter into plot number 3, and this is an area of land which appears to be taken out of agricultural use and used as an extension to the garden ground associated with the farmhouse at present. From there, we swing to the right again to look down the back of Tiliochi farmhouse. We catch the corner of plot number 3, and we see Tiliochi bungalow, which I mentioned already, and also another house beyond 2. So we have a group of buildings here, of which plot number 3 would be an extension of that group. Moving on from that photograph, we now go back out onto the public road, as it were. We have Tiliochi farmhouse identified. We have a fairly substantial garage and building with accommodation above, or storage accommodation above, associated, as I understand it, with Tiliochi farmhouse in the immediate foreground on the right-hand side of the photograph. But we're also beginning to pick up some of the, shall we say, traditional steading buildings on the left-hand side of the photograph. So the application site takes in that access across the yard there. So if we swing round to the left in the next photograph, we see the yard area associated both with the traditional building and the more modern building as part of the steading. And again, if we swing round again to the left of that photograph, we see Leland House itself, the remainder of the yard, and of course we're catching the corner of the contemporary farm building we saw previously. But this is the means of access to the other 2 plots. That's plots 1 and 2, rather than 2 and 3. So from there, if we swing round to the left of that photograph, we look into and across the field, of which part of it would be devoted to the application site and part would remain open. So from there, we move to the next photograph, which gives us a view of the entry from the yard into the proposed access. We see the gates entering into Leland House as well, which is separate. We then go through that entry, or go to that entry in the next photograph, and we look up the means of proposed access to the 2 plots. Obviously we can see a roadside house on the left-hand side of the photograph, backing onto the field. If we move to the next photograph, we're swinging slightly to the left, and that looks across the field towards the public road and the landscape beyond, and you can just catch the 2 other adjacent properties as well. So that's the remainder of the field once the 2 plots were developed. From there we move up the access, and we're going, I say, entering, as it were, the two main plots themselves up the access route. If we move up again, further up the access route and turn round, we're looking now down back towards the A91 where the first photograph was, where you might see a white dot in the distance there. That's a lorry going by on the main road there. So this gives us the boundary with Leyland House on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph. We then have the post and wire fence on that northern side. And then if we swing round in the next photograph towards the left, we look up the two main plots, and we're taking in the remains of the old stone building in this photograph as well. So that's us looking across the two plots towards the open countryside and the hills beyond, but also catching the adjoining trees, which I mentioned in the earlier photograph on the top of the hill. So this is a slightly more elevated part of the land in that locality. So swinging round to the left of that photograph, again we look up and we're just at the boundary between the proposed plots. We catch the remains of the building, we catch the trees, and we catch the roadside house and the adjoining field area. And again, swinging round again to the left of that photograph, we look across that remaining field area towards the public road, the farmland beyond, and of course we're catching the corner of the house on the opposite side of the road. Moving this time to the right of that photograph, we take in the ruin in some more detail. There is some discussion in the papers about whether or not there is any prospect of reusing that building, and I think it's recognised that that prospect has maybe passed. From there, we move up the plot to the boundary. These are the boundary trees on the west side of plots, the two plots. As you can see, they're fairly mature trees. And from there, if we swing round to the right, we look in the next photograph down the slope a little bit. We catch the ruin again, and of course we're seeing Leyland House itself beyond the proposed plots. Swinging round again to the left, the right in the next photograph, we look down the remaining area of the field, down back to the main group of buildings, which is associated with plot number 3. If we move to the next photograph, that just takes us back to plot number 3. To be clear, it's not really possible to show all the plots in one single photograph, so I'll leave you with that photograph, although I appreciate you may wish to go back and look at other photographs. And maybe just before I introduce the applicant's case in summary, and make it clear how the presentation is going to take place, I'll be presenting summaries, I say, of the applicant's case and the officer's report of handling in the usual way. These set out the position at the time when the review application was submitted back in 2020. After that, I'll then say a few words to update the planning context for the assessment of the proposal, which we appreciate there have been some change of circumstances since then. Also, I can confirm that members have been provided with copies of the officer's report and the reporter's decision concerning the certificate of lawful use or development, which is referred to in the papers. So I'll just turn now in summary to the applicant's case. Planning permission for this proposal was first granted in 2011 and renewed in 2016. This is seen as a material planning consideration to the appeal. The proposal was accepted as meeting the Council's rural housing policy previously. Additional landscaping was seen as crucial to contain the plots and limit further expansion opportunities. A Section 75 agreement was also concluded regarding an education contribution and to ensure that drainage provision took account of the need to mitigate phosphorus emissions within the Loch Leven catchment area. This proposal is seen as having been implemented by the sewage treatment plant having been installed as per the approved drawings. A car licence has also been issued by SEPA. As such, it is considered that there is no necessity for this planning application or the appeal. This appeal is submitted to protect the applicant's position. Although Local Development Plan 2 has now been adopted, the planning policies, guidance and siting criteria concerning housing in the countryside is fundamentally unchanged since 2011. The most recent refusal seems to be based on a different interpretation of these policies and guidance by different planning officers. Plots 1 and 2 have robust definable boundaries to the east, that's Leland House and its garden, and to the west, that's mature woodland. While the boundaries to the north and the south are open, they are seen as well established by a post and wire fence and reflect a building line of the adjacent properties. It's considered that they would appear as being part of the larger building group when seen from the A91 to the north, or when viewed against woodland when viewed from the east. As such, they are seen as having no adverse impact on the landscape. Regarding plot 3, this is seen as having well-defined boundaries to the north, that's Tiliochi Farmhouse, and to west, and that's Tiliochi Bungalow. There is characteristic fencing to the south and east. It is noted that the concerns expressed in relation to landscape impact have not been applied to this plot. Regarding the third reason for refusal, the drainage considerations have previously been dealt with through a legal agreement and, subsequently, a planning condition and SEPA's approval of the car licence. It is noted that SEPA were not consulted and no request for drainage information was made to the applicant, who could have provided more on this aspect prior to the decision. The LRB are invited to undertake a formal consultation with SEPA. There are no technical concerns regarding flooding, access, design, or plot sizes. It is accepted that the existing ruin is not worthy of retention or restoration. The proposal for plots 1 and 2 is seen as the more appropriate form and layout for the development. In conclusion, proposed plots 1 and 2 are considered to comply with Category 1, building groups, and Category 5, conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings. That's within Policy 19. Proposed plot 3 is considered to comply with Category 1, building groups, of Policy 19. The proposal is also considered to comply with Policy 39, all landscapes, and Policy 46, that's the Lochleven catchment area. Turning now in summary to the Officer's report of handling. Planning approval for the 3 houses was first granted in 2010, then renewed in 2016. This application was not implemented, therefore there is no current planning permission for this development. In noting this planning history, the officer has difficulty in seeing how the proposal would have complied with the Housing in the Countryside policy at that time. While acknowledging the planning history, the current application falls to be assessed against the current planning policy and guidance, specifically the relevant categories of Policy 19 and the supplementary guidance concerning housing in the countryside. Regarding plots 1 and 2, the buildings adjacent to the site are viewed as meeting the definition of a building group under Policy 19. However, to be acceptable, proposals have to comply with the associated siting criteria. In this case, the part of the field forming the plots only has definable boundaries to the east and west. The longer boundaries to the north and south do not have definable boundaries. The northern boundary only has a post and wire fence, and the southern boundary has nothing. Consequently, the proposal is not considered to have sufficient enclosure to form a definable site as an extension to a building group. The site is seen as being highly visible to the surrounding landscape, and the development is viewed as being intrusive within the countryside, especially from the A91, which lies to the north. This site contains a small ruinous stone building that has no roof and is no longer in use. The proposal on this site is for 2 5-bedroom detached houses with large detached garages. The footprint of the new buildings will be well in excess of the ruin to the extent the proposal is unable to comply with the provisions that allow for the conversion or replacement of non-domestic buildings under Category 5 of Policy 19 and the related supplementary guidance. Regarding Plot 3, the adjacent properties are viewed as meeting the definition of a building group under Policy 19. However, this site is also assessed as failing to comply with the associated siting criteria as an acceptable extension of a building group. This is because the eastern and southern boundaries are only enclosed by fencing, and the land is not therefore seen as forming a definable site within the wider landscape. Regarding drainage, it is noted that the sites lie within the Lochleven catchment area. No evidence of the required phosphorus mitigation measures have been submitted with the application, therefore SEPA has not been consulted. Access and flooding matters are seen as being capable of being controlled through conditions if planning permission was to be being granted. It is noted that a contribution to primary education would be required if permission was being granted. Turning now to representations, Kinross Civic Trust have made a representation objecting to the proposed development, mainly concerning the lack of information in relation to drainage, the proposal being contrary to the Housing in the Countryside policy, the houses being out of character with the surrounding area. In this case, there was a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. I'll maybe just turn now to make a few comments by way of an update summary. At the first consideration of this case, the LRB deferred making a decision to request that development management consult with SEPA regarding phosphorus mitigation measures, and to discuss with the applicant his assertion that the previous planning application was an extant permission. When the proposal was brought back for a second consideration, a decision was again deferred due to insufficient clarity as to whether or not the previous permission was extant. When the case came back for a third consideration, it was then known that the applicant had submitted an application for a certificate of lawful use or development, and that this was progressing through the planning system. The outcome of that process is that both development management in assessing the certificate of application and the reporter in assessing the subsequent appeal have concluded that the previous planning proposal was not implemented and that planning permission for the development has expired. The applicant considers that the previous planning permission is a material planning consideration in the assessment of the current appeal. The local development plan provides the foremost consideration for determining the review appeal. In this instance, this focuses on the local development plan policies and supplementary guidance relating to housing in the countryside. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed for that full report, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? In order to give you a chance, Councillor James, we'll let you go first.
Typical. Thanks very much, Convener. No, I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. I did try and give you an in there, Councillor James. And Councillor Wilson, have you any questions?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you and colleagues, Councillor Simpson. Mr. Harrison's given us a very, very comprehensive resume, and we've all got previous on this, convener, this application, which is helpful in understanding the complexities of the situation, and we've also had a ream of paper, so I don't have any questions either.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. You are correct. We have all been on LRBs that considered this in various combinations, together and otherwise. I have a couple of questions, if I may, Mr. Harrison. One refers to the picture in front of us, because my questions refer to definable boundaries. So if we look at this picture, am I right in thinking that there are no definable boundaries to this plot? Oops. Right. We've got the right picture still, yes. Or if there are, can you point them out to me?
Right. The picture is taken from basically the back of Tiliochi farmhouse.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the definable boundary in terms of enclosure was seen by the officer as the farmhouse itself, and in that sense there's a degree of enclosure. I appreciate looking at the photograph. It's not as if we've got, shall we say, a bank of mature trees or something defining the boundary between the original garden ground of the farmhouse and what I'm fairly certain from past photographs, which you'll see, I say, within your paper, when the original planning application was dealt with, the application site was in agricultural use. So it's, shall we say, a relatively, comparatively speaking, an addition to the garden ground, or certainly would appear to be such, an addition to the garden ground associated with Tiliochi farmhouse. So the farmhouse itself is seen as providing a degree of enclosure on one side, and you may remember in the photograph, which was after this one, when it swung round and looked down the side, or the rear elevation of the farmhouse, we had another property, that was Tiliochi cottage, I think it's called, or bungalow, I beg your pardon. And to that extent, that is set back a little bit in relation to the garden ground in the foreground here, and it appears, even in this photograph, to have taken in additional land going down to the little building you see, little shed as it were, in the far corner of the application site. So if I appreciate it's open garden ground, but there's a fence on that side. Again, it's defined by a fence and somebody's garden, it would appear. So it's again, maybe not a bank of mature trees, but there's a degree of definition in that sense. There seemed to be a lack of definition on the other boundaries as far as the office is concerned, particularly on the boundary towards the east. That's where the axis is coming in. You may remember from earlier photographs, it was basically onto an area of farmland. In fact, I think even in this photograph at the time, there were a number of sheep grazing in that field.
So this is in effect, Mr. Harrison, the bottom of Tiliochi farmhouse garden. And would you characterise this as backland development, given its situation?
It is of that nature, yes.
Yeah. Could we look then, again, considering the boundaries, to the photograph you had of showing the big house in the background going down the hill? I think it was towards the end of the presentation. One round from that, if we may. That's the one. Yep.
Yep.
So, oh, sorry, the one just before that, Saracen. Sorry. That's the one there. So can you indicate to us there where the definable boundaries are?
The definable boundaries are maybe not completely clear in this photograph, but if you look beyond the ruin, the trees you see there are within the grounds of, as I understand it, within the grounds of Leland House, and that provides a degree of enclosure on that side, albeit I don't know for sure, but I understand that's a separate property rather than one within the applicant's ownership. The two red lines you have here are the boundaries to the north and the south. The one to the north is basically onto the adjoining field. It's not that clear from this photograph that there is actually an adjoining field there. It's not the boundary of Leyland House. The ground drops away from that boundary down towards the burn. So the field is really effectively in dead ground, as it were, from this photograph. So there's a post and wire fence only on that boundary, and of course the other line, as it were, on the bottom of this photograph is really just a line through the field, which effectively would subdivide the field, and it has no defined boundary at the moment. Having said that, what's not apparent in this photograph is there's of course the mature woodland, as it were, to the west, as it were, in the previous photograph, enclosing that side, and that's possibly the strongest enclosure. But obviously the two longest boundaries are the more open boundaries.
Yeah, that was my view when I was there on Saturday, that there didn't seem to be defined boundaries for most of this site. But I think that's all my questions. As the colleagues have said, we have a huge amount of information on this, and we have had huge amounts of information previously. So I think we can move to a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor James.
I don't think I require any more information. Happy to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Given the report we've had from Mr. Harrison, the fair volume of correspondence we've had today, and our previous knowledge and experience, Convener, I think we've enough information to make a decision. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I've found the update particularly helpful as well. So I think we can now proceed. So we will now assess the case and move to debate. So having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start things off. So colleagues, I think this has been a fairly complicated process to get to where we are today, but this now gives us an opportunity to almost look afresh at this application. I have to say, from my questions you'll have gathered, I'm not at all happy about the open countryside aspect of the boundaries. And Mr. Harrison made mention of the Kinross Civic Trust's letter of 24th January last year. I don't always agree with everything that civic trusts say, but on this occasion, they say that the proposal appears to attempt to create a building group where none exists at present and is contrary to policy 19. And they also say that these houses are very large, urban, executive style compared with existing development. And they go on to criticise that. And I have to say I agree entirely with them. Although the previous history is very much a material consideration, we also have to bear in mind that things have moved on since 2009 and 2010. There has been a new local development plan, and that of course takes primacy over all other things. We've clarified the status of the original application and got the other information that we did ask for, but I think it's important to remember that planning policy evolves over time. And it would be my view that these are going to be highly visible, and I don't think that they take cognizance of current policy. So, colleagues, it would be my view that we uphold both reason 1 and reason 2 for refusal, although I would suggest that we strike out reason 3, as that may not be relevant any longer. And I would have a little bit of suggestion of tidying up and an addition to make to my reasons, but I think it would be helpful in the first instance to hear the views of my colleagues first. So, Councillor Wilson, may we hear your view?
Indeed, I agree. I'm going to sound like Councillor James for a minute. I think you've said all the things I would wanted to say, and I agree with you entirely, particularly since we've been able to clarify the historical context of this, thanks to two recent emails which have helped substantially in understanding where we are on a planning come legal basis. So I'm with you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. Councillor James.
Thanks, convener. I think everything has been said. I mean, back along, and I have been or had taken part in previous LRBs, as you've rightly pointed out. And to be fair, I had a deal of sympathy. However, I noticed that the DPA dismissed their appeal on the legitimacy of the previous planning. And I'm with both yourself and Councillor Wilson in the fact that our planning officers have made the right decision, and I'd go along with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor. And usually we're all in agreement once again, Mr. Elliott. Should make life a little easier for you. I would like to just make a few suggestions, and we'll see what my colleagues think of these. I think if we look at the first refusal, I think the on line 3, I think it should be countryside supplementary guidance. I think is the full Sunday name for the thing there. And I think I would add a little bit more to this. I think because I think we need to flesh out a little bit more our reasoning. And I would think we would say something like, notably, the development would constitute an extension of existing building groups into open countryside on land not previously considered to be forming a definable boundary, and these sites will be within the long established boundaries, and I think the development is now going off into the surrounding countryside, Mr. Elliott. So if you can follow that.
Okay. Yes, Convener, if you want to go through the other grounds, I'll recap when you've gone through the ground.
And I think also we might want to just change the reason to slightly. I think when we get to the second line, I think we should say that plots 1 and 2 in particular would erode the local distinctiveness of diversity. I think we should put wood in there. And given that, I think after exposed, I think it's more obvious when you're there, but it's pretty obvious from this photograph that it's locally elevated land. So I think, okay, Mr. Elliott, perhaps if you would like to perhaps translate my stuff into English, and then we'll see what Councillor James and Councillor Wilson say.
What I have came here on ground 1. Third line is, instead of countryside guide, it becomes countryside supplementary guidance 2020, technical change of course. And at the end, it may not be exactly your wording, but if I could narrate what I have, I think at the end you add in, notably the development would constitute an extension.
Well, I think extensions, because there are the 2 sites to consider, yeah.
I think that would be appropriate, Convener. So constitute extensions of existing building groups into the open countryside on land that is not assessed as forming definable boundaries with definable boundaries with long established boundaries, which would, and this is my wording from what you had, would facilitate the integration of the development into the surrounding landscape. Did that kind of cover things, Convener?
Yeah, I think you got what I meant. Congratulations, Mr. Elliott. Just thank you for that.
Yes.
If we might, and then if you would.
Ground 2, sorry, Convener. Yes, ground 2. Ground 2, second line, it would be plots 1 and 2 would erode local distinctiveness, and I think the last line would read existing building group onto an exposed and locally elevated area of land. And just to clarify, ground 3, as I understand it, Convener, would drop out entirely because of the update clarifications we've had.
Yeah, I think that was clear to me, certainly. So I just check that Councillor James is content with these additions. Councillor James.
Very eloquently put, Convener. Yeah.
Yes, I think eventually, thanks to Mr. Elliott. I think Councillor Wilson.
I'm content.
Right, thank you very much indeed. So that brings today's meeting to a conclusion. I realise this will not be the result the applicant wished for, but I think this has had a thorough examination several times, and now that we have all the information to hand, we're able to make a definitive decision. So With that, I would like to thank everyone for their attendance and perhaps see you at the meeting next month. Thank you all very much indeed.